Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, 2019. And what a year it's been. Could the world put aside short-term economic gain to save humankind? From Latin America to the Middle East, people took to the street to protest the unequal spread of wealth and demand that governments end austerity. And a trade war between the United States and China has put the brakes on global growth and is reshaping globalisation. The biggest story of this year, and for that matter this century, has to be climate change and the lack of will, or apparently the lack of will to do anything about it. With the exception of the European Union, there's very little effort to reduce emissions. The cost of our inaction has been put at $2 billion a day. The United Nations says that $48 trillion needs to be spent by 2050 to avoid catastrophe for humankind. That means putting survival ahead of short-term profits. Governments have made it a virtue to deny the encroaching dangers. While the Amazon went up in flames in a land grab by ranchers, Brazil's right-wing president, Jair Bolsonaro, was blaming environmentalists for manufacturing a crisis. Brazil's handling of the situation strained its relationship with the EU. Al Jazeera's Cereza Bo has our report now from Itapua in Brazil.
Every day, de Jesus Aparecido goes into the Jamari National Park to look for seeds. He's trying to preserve the rainforest and the dozens of species that live in it. The threat of deforestation has become a major problem, and NGOs like Rio Terra are fighting back.
What we are seeing is really bad. They are burning the forest. So our work looks into encouraging families to enroll in economic alternatives that don't destroy, deforest, have environmental impact, or kill the rivers.
Rio Terra is growing thousands of trees every year and help locals make a living while also caring for the environment. The NGO is funded by what's called the Amazon Fund. Handled by the government, the fund raises donations to help fight deforestation in Amazonia.
Deforestation and the fires have already destroyed large sectors of the Amazon rainforest, but there are projects like this one that are trying to preserve and reforest the areas that have been already devastated. There are more than 40 species here of trees and crops. The problem is that projects like this one are now at risk.
Germany and Norway are crucial sponsors of the fund that helps over 100 projects like this one. But they have halted all payments to condemn President Jair Bolsonaro's environmental policies. While Rio Terra has managed to reforest 800 hectares of trees this year. Alexander Queiroz fears a drop in donations will impact their work.
We are very concerned, but we've been working on our projects through the Amazon Fund and Petrobras for a long time. That being said, strategically, we're already looking for other sources of funding. We want to find ways so that the funds don't go through the government.
Bolsonaro, a longtime skeptic of environmental concerns, wants to open the Amazon to more agriculture and mining. Ivaneide Cardoso has been working to protect indigenous groups living in Rondonia. For years, she has been threatened by loggers and miners, but international funding has allowed her to do her work.
We have much more work now because the local environmental authorities are committed to the cause but feel alone, threatened, and without support from the government. So we are trying at least to show the world there are people who care about the environment, but we don't have any support. Instead, we are being weakened by the government's narrative.
NGOs say they're ready to fight Bolsonaro's attempt to commercialize the rainforest, but need international aid to do so. They say they can protect what Brazil's president will not.
Now, rising sea levels, a sinking and polluted capital were just some of the reasons that Indonesia's President Joko Widodo gave for plans to move the capital to the island of Borneo. It was also an admission that Jakarta and the island of Java dominate the country's economy, and economic success needs to be spread more fairly across the 17,000 island archipelago. Al Jazeera's Raheela Mahomed reports.
This largely untouched part of East Kalimantan will become the new capital of Indonesia if the president has his way. It's in stark contrast to the capital Jakarta, clogged with heavy traffic, smog and sinking. The pressure to move is rising, along with sea levels, which may mean the city of more than 10 million people could be underwater within the next 30 years. And this is where the city's relocation may end up. Borneo Island, known for its lush rainforest and rare wildlife. While it was chosen for being less prone to earthquakes and floods, there are concerns the massive move will threaten conservation efforts. Activists say mining and logging have already damaged some areas.
A new capital here will destroy the ecosystem. It will cause forest destruction, raise the temperature, risk forest fires, and during the drought season will create a water shortage.
Moving the capital has been discussed for decades, but recently resurrected by President Joko Widodo. Estimated to cost $32 billion, it will be one of the world's largest single infrastructure projects. The plan is to build the city on land between East Kalimantan's two largest cities, Balikpapan and Samarinda, connected by this 99-kilometer-long toll road. The first stage of construction will be around this land. There'll be a presidential palace, ministries and housing for government and schools. Elsewhere, there'll be hotels, businesses and offices to meet the demand of the city's new population. While the new capital is welcomed by many Indonesians, villagers in Pasir fear they'll be forced off land they've lived on for generations.
We worry about the legality of our land. Only 20% of us have a legal document to say it belongs to us. Foreigners have been coming here. It's causing tension in the community.
Government leaders in Jakarta say the exact site of the new city hasn't been revealed to avoid property speculation.
We don't need to ask people when we want to move the capital. It's up to the government to decide, as long as we don't destroy the environment or harm anybody.
While plans are still in their early stages, the first construction is expected to be complete by 2024. Moving an entire capital city will be a delicate balancing act for Indonesia's leaders, preserving the natural habitat while building their vision for a new concrete jungle.
Well, inequality and the unequal spread of wealth also contributed to discontent across continents, from the Chile protests in France to Lebanon's cash crunch. There's right now a rebellion in Latin America against the politics of more of the same. In Chile, the rise of train fares led to street protests which morphed into calls for an end to neoliberalism or freewheeling capitalism. Al Jazeera's Latin America editor Lucia Newman reports.
Chile is accustomed to frequent and strong earthquakes. But an unprecedented social outburst that exploded 3 weeks ago is sending much deeper shockwaves throughout what was seen as Latin America's most stable and prosperous democracy. It was sparked off by a relatively small increase in the metro fare. But millions of Chileans saw it as the last straw and took to the streets to show that they've had enough of an economic system that they say hasn't delivered its promise of prosperity. Except for an increasingly wealthy few. 57-year-old Rosa Ortega has worked as a maid all her life. Her eldest son and husband work in construction and became unemployed this week. Like millions of middle and lower middle-class Chileans, they're deep in debt and struggling just to feed themselves.
But the most worst is yet to come. Yesterday I was on the bus with a 75-year-old pensioner who still works as a maid because her pension is $136, which is more than I get. No one can survive on that. We'll all have to work till we drop dead.
Overhauling Chile's private pension system, which was installed during the former military dictatorship, is one of the most pressing demands, along with decent wages, public health care, education and affordable transportation. The list of grievances is long. Rosa's children have all taken part in the ongoing demonstrations.
I agree. It's taken Chile 35 years to wake up. All those promises about how the return of democracy would bring us happiness. All these years of injustice. It shouldn't have come to this. But hopefully we'll get something out of it this time.
Chile isn't Latin America's poorest country. On the contrary, on the books it has the highest per capita income in the region and a stable economy based on an extreme free market model. And some see that as the problem.
The economic model established by the Constitution hands education, healthcare, social security and labour relations over to the private sector. The state plays a minimum role. The model has been very successful in generating wealth, but has also generated enormous levels of inequality.
Chile is the member of the OECD with the highest income disparity. But conservative Senator Juan Antonio Coloma dismisses the notion that the economic model needs to be overhauled.
Let's put things into context. Chile has made incredible strides in the last 30 years. It's reduced poverty from 47.9% to 3%. It's a country that has changed dramatically, economically and socially.
But not fast enough for Chileans who say that they've been abused by a system that guarantees enormous profits for the private sector, while millions are struggling to stay afloat on increasingly meager salaries. The vast majority of the protests are peaceful, but every day small but violent groups of vandals and hooded protesters destroy public and private property. Until now, the mass protests had been confined to the mid and downtown areas of Santiago, as well as working-class neighborhoods. But now they are relocating to the very heart of what's nicknamed Sanhattan, a spin-off of Manhattan because of its posh skyscrapers. That includes South America's tallest building. This is the gateway to Santiago's most affluent neighborhoods. And what these protesters are trying to do is demonstrate that their social uprising will also impact those who have the most to lose. The crisis has driven down this year's economic forecast, as well as Chile's currency. But what started as an economic and social crisis has rapidly spiraled into a political one, with calls for the president's resignation and a new constitution. Resolving this crisis within Chile's democratic institutions is turning out to be the biggest challenge.
The idea of globalisation has come under attack from President Trump's Make America Great Again to Prime Minister Modi's Make in India, while a trade war between China and the United States has taken a few points off global growth. The biggest losers have been exporting nations like Germany and Japan. We have two reports for you. In a moment, Scott Heidler looks at some of the benefits from Bangkok. But first, Tanvir Chowdhury looks at the rise of steel prices thanks to the US-China trade war.
Small home builders are the hardest hit. The shop owner lives with his extended family next door to where his future home should be taking shape.
Building
a roof needs a lot of rods. If the prices were like before, it would be done by now. But with steel prices shooting up, work on building our home, our lifelong dream, has stalled. Now we wait for the prices to go down.
Bangladesh relies on importing scrap metal from the US to make steel rod, which are the backbone of the new buildings. But they have become more expensive to build because the import costs have risen. President Trump's trade war with China is impacting Bangladesh's steel industry, which imports a significant amount of scrap iron from the United States. Protectionist measures taken by the US administration is reducing supply and increasing prices. And so the cost of constructions have gone up in Bangladesh. The capital Dhaka is the hub of the steel rod market. Steel traders say business is bad.
Yes, there's an impact, with sales almost coming to a halt. People who are planning to build a home are very cautious now, as they have to borrow money, while the market is volatile.
Some steel traders are stockpiling stocks, betting prices will rise when or if the trade war eventually ends.
Yes, the prices changed for, I think, more on speculation, and it went up sharp.
President Trump's tariffs are costing poorer countries as well as his own and China. There's been a construction boom in Bangladesh over the past 20 years or so. But the higher price of construction materials, such as steel, are threatening to stall recent economic growth.
With trade negotiations between the world's two biggest economies still a work in progress, China's close and reliant neighbors are feeling the impact. On the outskirts of Bangkok, Ratapon Labsisawat runs a housework company started by his father. The medium-sized business is heavily dependent on China. Factories there supply raw materials Ratappan uses to manufacture products for his Thai customers. The trade war is costing him money, but despite that, he sees an upside.
I think there's benefit to be made. China may have all the material that I need, but here we have skilled labor who know the art and craft. We can export our products without going through China or worry about the trade war.
In one high-profile case, Thailand has actually won new business as a result of Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods.
U.S. motorcycle giant Harley-Davidson announced that it's moving the manufacturing of its China-bound bikes from the U.S. to Thailand by the end of the year. This to avoid tariffs levied on imports of American vehicles.
The company had actually opened a factory in Thailand before the trade war to supply the growing East Asia market. But an economic advisor to one of Thailand's largest companies warns of a threat not just to Thailand, but to the global supply chain if China and the U.S. can't settle their differences soon.
If trade war going to last longer, they're going to have the long-lasting changing of the direction of the supply chain, particularly for the big country like China. It seems to me that China now going to become more internalize their economy.
That means China will rely less on neighboring countries for materials and goods, producing more of its own. That'd be bad news for countries like Thailand. Its largest export market is China. The economy here relies heavily on its big neighbor to the north, so businesses could be forced to recalibrate their supply chains.
In May of this year, a new economic bloc was born. 24 nations came together to form the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The aim of the bloc is to increase trade between nations by tearing down trade barriers. The hope is to become the next European Union. Absent from the original group, though, was the region's biggest economy, Nigeria, although it eventually put pen to paper. But for the past few months, Nigeria's borders have been closed to imports. The government says that's needed to stop illegal goods being smuggled in and criminals moving freely. Al Jazeera's Ahmed Idris reports now from the Nigeria-Benin border.
These trucks have been stuck here at the Nigeria-Benin border for months. Caught by a sudden change in government policy, they're not allowed to go forward and can't go back. Zubairu Mele has been importing and exporting goods for 23 years. He says he's never seen anything like this.
Government should hand over to us goods that we've already paid import duty for. We have more than 500 trucks stuck on the Benin Republic side of the border. Many of the goods are damaged. We'll lose more if this doesn't end soon.
Some businessmen say they have lost hundreds of millions of dollars since the middle of August, when the government ordered the borders to be closed to imports. This is one of the reasons the government says it's shutting the crossings. Illegally imported rice. Officials say the flow of contraband into Nigeria is killing its economy and production and opening the door to criminals and weapons.
We feel as a nation that the continuous play of Big Brother have been exploited by some neighbors, and therefore we have a duty, a responsibility to engage in legitimate actions that will better secure our country, better secure our people, and more importantly, stimulate the standard of living of our people.
The port of Cotonou in Benin is 120 kilometers from Lagos. Nigerian officials say many goods from Cotonou are smuggled past customs inspectors.
Seme is the busiest of Nigeria's border towns, connecting the port city of Cotonou in Benin Republic with the country's commercial capital, Lagos. This used to be a very important trading point for imported goods, especially rice. Now in this market and in town, there is little traffic since Nigeria closed its borders. The government hopes that shutting down the borders will stop vehicles from smuggling illegal goods into the country.
The security clampdown has forced up the prices of goods in markets, and there are shortages in some places. The government says the measures will grow Nigeria's economy in the long term. Officials say in the first 2 weeks of the border closures, revenues from import duty went up by more than 5%, but that left many Nigerians concerned about rising cost of foodstuff.
We don't get regular supplies of foodstuff. Here in Seme, no food is getting in across the border, and no food reaches us here from Lagos. We are in a fix.
The government says it wants to stop smugglers and criminals who pose a bigger threat to the country and its economy, and will keep the borders closed for now.
And finally, a big issue in many an election. Who should be responsible for providing health care, the state or for-profit corporations? Al Jazeera's Shahab Rutanzi reports now from the United States on how the health insurance industry is failing patients.
When Verdell Clark was diagnosed with cancer, she felt confident that her health insurance would cover her medical expenses. How many years, though, had you guys been paying in, though, to that insurance plan, though?
Oh, my God, ever since, like, 30 years, I guess, maybe.
But she wasn't fully covered. Her health insurance paid for most of her treatment, but there remained a few $1,000s that she was expected to cover and that she just didn't have. Her hospital withheld her cancer treatment. What about the Hippocratic Oath? First, do no harm. I mean, aren't they supposed to...
Well, I don't think that applied at that time.
And then she wound up detained at a courthouse after the hospital sued her.
I'm walking up there with shackles and handcuffs. I didn't bring any of my pain medicine because I didn't think I was going to be there all day.
This sort of trauma from medical bills isn't an uncommon experience for Americans. In fact, 2/3 of bankruptcies are due to medical issues in the US. To find out why, we traveled to Philadelphia to speak to Wendell Potter. He was once an executive at the health insurance company Cigna. Most people in the US pay monthly premiums to health insurance companies like Cigna as a safety net in case they need medical treatment of some kind, just as Verdell Clark had. These companies then determine whether they will receive and can afford that treatment. In 2009, Potter blew the whistle on the health insurance industry to the US Congress. That year, the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare, was passed. It did widen coverage and close loopholes insurance companies were using to refuse their clients health care.
We are done.
And 20 million more Americans were able to get health insurance as a result, though still some 28 million Americans would remain uninsured.
Can you hear me?
But health insurance is still a for-profit enterprise. Yes, you can now get insured, but if you actually need treatment, it will cost you.
Just as bad, if not worse, is the rising number of people who are underinsured. These are people who are paying good money every month for their health insurance premiums, but finding that they now have very high deductibles. In other words, they have to pay a lot of money out of their own pockets before their coverage kicks in.
For Potter, the fundamental principles that guide insurance companies haven't changed.
To make as much money as they can, to bring as much revenue in, but to pay out as little as possible in claims. Because when that happens, they've got more money to reward shareholders and to enrich their executives. I know that because I was one of them that made quite a lot of money.
The statistics aren't in dispute. The US has the most expensive healthcare system in the world. However, when health system performance is compared, such as quality, efficiency, access to care, equity, and the ability to lead a long life, the US is last against other developed countries. The US does rank top for one indicator, though, the amount it spends on administrative costs per capita. And part of that money is dedicated to insurance companies hiring doctors and nurses as what are called medical directors. But they don't treat patients, they try to find ways not to treat patients.
Everyone who's employed by an insurance company knows that they have their part to play in making sure that that company meets Wall Street's financial expectations. So it doesn't have to be direct, that you will deny X number of things or treatments, but you know that if you're going to keep your job and hopefully get a raise and a bonus, you got to do what the company expects you to do.
Health insurance is expected to be a major issue in the 2020 election, but Potter recognizes the framing of the debate as one he and other executives would shape in the boardroom before funneling money to politicians.
The terms that are being used today are the same terms that I used to use, and in fact, in some cases, helped create. It is to get people to be afraid of change. There's a term that's an acronym that's used for this kind of propaganda campaign. It's FUD, and it's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And these campaigns are designed to get people to fear change, to make them feel uncertain about what's being proposed and that they would benefit from it, and to doubt those who are advocating it.
My story be able to help someone else, because I know there's someone out there who's been through the same thing or even worse than I have. And so that I feel like my story may make a difference for someone, or it may embolden someone where they may speak out.
But for now, it's unsettling how familiar Verdell Clark's story is in the US and how powerful the forces are that want to keep it so.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, you can tweet me. I'm at @afinnegan on Twitter. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or you can drop us a line. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.